It starts with sound. Bugles, not one, dozens, echoing off frozen ridgelines in every direction at once, north, south, east, west, bouncing between mountain walls until the sound has no single source, just noise coming from everywhere in the dark. Then the shooting starts. It is November 27th, 1950. The temperature is -40 degrees Celsius. Men are waking up inside sleeping bags that have frozen around them, grabbing rifles with bare hands and feeling skin pull against metal, trying to work bolts that won't move, trying to fire weapons that the cold has turned into dead weight. The muzzle flashes are swallowed almost immediately by the snow. A burst of light, gone. Another, gone. The darkness absorbs everything. Chinese soldiers are already inside the perimeter, not approaching it. Inside it. The attack is not coming from one direction, it is coming from all of them. Across a 40-mile front, in the mountains of northeast Korea, 8 Chinese divisions hit simultaneously. The timing is not coincidence. The coordination is not accidental. This has been planned for weeks by an army that moved into these mountains without being seen, without being heard, without a single confirmed sighting reaching the men now fighting for their lives in the dark. 15,000 UN troops, scattered across a single mountain road and the frozen ground around it. 120,000 Chinese soldiers, already closing every exit. The cold is not background, it is a weapon. At -40 degrees Celsius, exposed skin freezes in minutes, not hours, minutes. A man who loses his gloves reaching for ammunition has maybe 4 minutes before his fingers stop working. A man who stops moving, who takes cover and stays still too long, begins to die without knowing it. The body pulls heat inward, away from the extremities, protecting the core. Hands go numb, then feet. The cold is quiet, and it does not announce itself. Morphine syringes are frozen solid. Blood plasma is frozen solid. A medic treating a wounded man in the dark, in -40-degree wind, is working with supplies that don't function in these conditions. The weapons are jamming, the medicine doesn't work. The cold kills the men the bullets miss. By midnight, the picture is this. The Marines at Udam-ni, on the western side of the reservoir, cut off. The garrison at Hagaruri, in the middle, surrounded, perimeter under assault, airstrip under fire. The units at Koto-ri, further south, isolated, the road north already blocked. On the eastern shore of the reservoir, army units from Task Force Faith are being hit by forces that outnumber them so severely that the math alone is a death sentence. Every position is separated from every other position by Chinese-held ground. There is no continuous line. There is no front. There are pockets of men, in the dark, in the cold, fighting in every direction at once. The road south, the only road, runs through mountain passes that the Chinese now control. There is no other road. No reinforcement is coming. The nearest friendly forces are 78 miles away, at the port of Hungnam on the coast. Between here and there, mountain passes, frozen gorges, Chinese blocking positions, and weather that makes movement at night a death sentence on its own terms. The men in these positions know some of this. They don't know all of it yet. What they know is that the bugles haven't stopped, that the attacks keep coming, that the man next to them is bleeding and the morphine won't work, and the rifle is jammed and the cold is everywhere. Here is what makes Chosin different from every other encirclement in modern military history. They got out. Not all of them. The cost was severe, and it will be accounted for. But the force, the 1st Marine Division, the surviving army units, the attached Allied troops, fought their way out of complete encirclement. They moved 78 miles through Chinese-held mountains. They crossed a destroyed bridge that engineers rebuilt under fire. They reached the sea. They brought their wounded with them. They brought their dead with them. And they broke, in the process, the Chinese divisions that had surrounded them, inflicting casualties that by some estimates exceeded their own several times over. This should not have been possible. 8 divisions, -40 degrees Celsius, frozen weapons, no reinforcement, one road, every pass blocked. The men who planned the Chinese operation had calculated that encirclement plus cold plus terrain equals surrender or annihilation. That was not an unreasonable calculation. It had worked before against other armies in other winters. It didn't work here, so the question, the one that drives everything that follows, is not whether they escaped. They did. The question is how. How does a surrounded force, outnumbered 8-1, in conditions that kill men who simply stop moving, break through 8 divisions and reach the sea? What decisions made that possible, and what came within hours of making it impossible? Night. Northeast Korea, October 1950. No fires, no vehicles, no radio transmissions. Columns of men moving through mountain passes in complete darkness, tens of thousands of them, stepping carefully, maintaining intervals, stopping when aircraft sounds approach and pressing into ravines and tree lines until the sound fades. Then moving again, they carry their supplies on their backs, they cook nothing, they light nothing. During the day they disappear, into gullies, under canopy, beneath camouflage that from the air looks like undisturbed terrain. At night, they move, 300,000 Chinese soldiers crossing into North Korea, occupying ridgelines, mapping roads, digging positions, building a trap around a valley that the men walking into it don't yet know exists. Day. The same mountains. A few weeks later, US Marines moving north in column along a single road, the main supply route, a narrow strip of gravel and frozen dirt that winds through mountain passes toward the Chosin Reservoir. Trucks, jeeps, artillery pieces, men on foot. The sky is clear, the air is cold but manageable. The mood is something close to confidence. MacArthur has said the war is nearly over. His headquarters has told field commanders to push north, reach the Yalu River, the border with China, and end it before winter sets in. The pressure is real, speed matters. The faster the advance, the sooner the men go home. The road stretches north, the Marines follow it. Night, the ridge lines above the road. Chinese units moving into position on the high ground, not attacking, not revealing themselves, occupying the terrain that commands every approach, every pass, every choke point along the road below. They have maps of that road. They have counted the passes. They know where a column must slow down, where it must compress, where it has no room to maneuver. They are not in a hurry. Day, further north. The Marines are told that Chinese forces in the area are minimal, that any resistance will be light, that the main Chinese army is not present in strength. Some of this comes from aerial reconnaissance. Aircraft flying over the mountains see roads, terrain, tree lines. They do not see 300,000 men because 300,000 men are not moving when the aircraft are overhead. The intelligence is not fabricated. It is simply collected during the hours when the enemy has chosen not to exist. The Marines keep moving north. There is one man who is not comfortable with any of this. Major General Oliver Prince Smith commands the 1st Marine Division. He is not a reckless officer. He is not given to panic. But as his division moves north along that single road, he is looking at the terrain the way a man looks at something that doesn't add up. The road is the only road. If it is cut behind him, his division is isolated. The mountains on either side are steep enough that any force holding the high ground controls everything below. His supply line is already stretched thin. The further north he goes, the longer and more vulnerable it becomes. Smith slows his advance. He orders supply stockpiles built at intervals along the road. At Kotori, at Hagaruri, at points south, he insists on fortifying positions rather than simply passing through them. He refuses to stretch his units beyond what he considers a defensible dispersion. His superiors are not pleased. The pressure from above is to move faster, not slower. Smith is told, in terms that leave little ambiguity, that his caution is holding up the advance. He keeps moving, but he keeps stockpiling. He does not know yet that those stockpiles will be the difference between survival and annihilation. He only knows that the mountains make him uneasy. Night. The high ground above the reservoir. Chinese units from the 9th Army Group are in position. 9 divisions, eventually reinforced to more, assigned specifically to destroy the 1st Marine Division. Their commander, Song Shilun, has studied the terrain. He knows the road, he knows the positions. He knows where the Marines are and where they are going. His men are in the mountains the Marines are moving through, not ahead of them, around them. The road the Marines are using is already mapped in Chinese planning documents as the axis of advance that will be cut on the night of the attack. The passes the Marines must use to move south are already identified as blocking positions. The Marines are not walking toward a battle. They are walking into the center of one that has already been arranged around them. In late October, Chinese forces made contact with UN units further west, a series of sharp engagements that inflicted significant casualties before the Chinese broke contact and disappeared back into the mountains. The encounters were reported. Analysts noted them. Some officers raised the possibility that China had committed major forces. The conclusion that came back: probably not a full intervention. Possibly a limited force sent to signal displeasure. Probably not the main army. The advance continued. On the eastern side of the Chosin Reservoir, army units from the 7th Infantry Division were moving into position. On the western side, Marine regiments were pushing toward Udamni. The force was spreading out along the reservoir's perimeter, extending the line, thinning the coverage, increasing the distance between units. The Chinese watched all of it. By November 27th, the picture from the Chinese side looks like this: 15,000 UN troops spread across a 40-mile front, isolated from each other by terrain and distance, connected by a single road that runs through passes already designated as blocking positions, supplied by a line that stretches 78 miles to the coast. From the ridgelines above, in the dark, the Chinese commanders can see the lights of the Marine positions below. The Marines cannot see them. The night of November 27th is hours away. The Marines are in their positions. Some are eating, some are sleeping. Some are on watch, looking out at a darkness that shows nothing moving. The high ground is not empty. The road south is not open. The passes are not unguarded. And at 21:30, the bugles will start. The Chinese are already above them. The Marines don't know it yet. What happens in the next 6 hours will determine whether any of them see December, and whether the man who ordered this advance understood what he had sent them into. China will not intervene. That is the conclusion. Not a guess. Not a working assumption subject to revision. A conclusion, stated with confidence, acted on without reservation, built into every decision that follows. General Douglas MacArthur, commanding all UN forces in Korea, believes it in October 1950. He believes it in November. He believes it while 300,000 Chinese soldiers are already in the mountains his men are advancing through. He is wrong, and the distance between his certainty and the reality on those ridgelines is measured, eventually, in the men who don't come home. To understand why MacArthur believed it, you have to understand what he was looking at. China had no meaningful air force capable of challenging US air power. Its logistics were primitive by American standards. No mechanized supply chain, no ability to sustain a modern army in the field for extended operations. Its military had just finished a civil war and was, by any conventional measure, not ready for a confrontation with the United States. MacArthur looked at those facts and reached a conclusion that was not unreasonable on its face. China would not risk a war it could not win. What that analysis missed was that China was not calculating the same way MacArthur was. China was not asking whether it could defeat the United States in a conventional war. It was asking whether it could make the cost of continuing high enough that the United States would stop. Those are different questions. They produce different answers. MacArthur was solving the wrong problem. By October 1950, UN forces had already achieved what the war's original objective required, pushing North Korean forces back above the 38th parallel. The decision to continue north toward the Chinese border was a political and military choice made at the highest levels. MacArthur wanted to finish it. He wanted the war ended before winter, before the political situation shifted, before anything complicated the victory that seemed within reach. Quote, "Zero" was not a casual phrase. It was a timeline. It shaped decisions. It created pressure on every commander below MacArthur to move faster, advance further, close the distance to the Yalu River before the window closed. Speed became the priority. Caution became an obstacle. The warnings existed. In late October, Chinese forces made sharp, aggressive contact with South Korean and US Army units in the mountains west of Chosin. The engagements were brief but severe, Chinese units hitting hard, inflicting casualties, then breaking contact and disappearing back into the terrain. Those contacts were reported. They were analyzed. The conclusion: limited Chinese forces, probably sent to signal that China was watching. not a full intervention, not the main army. That interpretation fit a pattern of how nations signal displeasure without going to war. It was a reasonable reading of limited evidence. It was also wrong. The units making contact were the forward edge of an army that was still moving into position. The men reading those reports saw a signal. They were looking at a deployment. Some intelligence analysts pushed for a more cautious interpretation. Some field commanders raised concerns about the terrain and the length of their supply lines. The reports existed. The doubts were logged. They did not change the timeline, because changing the timeline meant telling MacArthur that the advance needed to slow down. That quote one was not achievable. That conversation did not happen. Oliver Smith was having a different conversation. With himself, with his terrain maps. With the single road, his division was strung along. He looked at the road and saw one way in and one way out. He looked at the mountains and saw high ground he didn't control. He looked at his supply line and saw 78 miles of vulnerability between his forward units and the coast. He slowed down, not in open defiance, but measurably, deliberately. He ordered supply dumps built at Kotori and Hagaruri, positions along the road that his division would need if it had to fight its way back south. He insisted on fortifying Hagaruri before pushing further north. His superiors told him to speed up. He acknowledged the pressure and kept stockpiling. Those stockpiles, the ones his superiors considered unnecessary, will matter enormously in about 3 weeks. By mid-November, the 1st Marine Division is spread across the western side of the Chosin Reservoir. The Army's 7th Infantry Division is on the eastern shore. The supply line runs south through Kotori, through Funchilin Pass, down to the coast. It is one road for 15,000 men, and the passes that road runs through are being occupied quietly by forces that MacArthur's headquarters has assessed as not present in significant strength. Here is the gap that matters. MacArthur's assessment says limited Chinese forces, probably not intervening in strength. The mountains say 120,000 soldiers in position. Attack planned for November 27th. Between those two realities are 15,000 men who have been told the war is nearly over. They are eating, sleeping, writing letters home, believing that the enemy ahead of them is retreating. The enemy is not retreating, the enemy is above them. November 27th is 4 days away. The Marines are still moving north. The Chinese are already in position, and the general who decided China wouldn't come is in Tokyo, 700 miles away, certain that the war is ending. If he's right, the advance is safe. If he's wrong, if China is already there waiting, then 15,000 men are about to find out what it costs when certainty at the top meets reality at the bottom of a frozen mountain. 21:30. Bugles, not one position, every direction, north, south, east, west, sound bouncing off frozen ridgelines until it has no source, just presence. A wall of noise in the dark, then the whistles, then the shooting starts. The men grabbing their rifles are grabbing metal that has been sitting in -40 degrees air for hours. Bare skin on a rifle stock in that temperature doesn't slide. It sticks. A man who grabs his weapon wrong loses skin getting his hand free. Bolts won't cycle. The lubricant has thickened in the cold, turned from oil into something closer to paste. Men are working bolts by hand, forcing them, some succeeding, some not. Machine gun crews are clearing jams in the dark with fingers they can barely feel. The muzzle flashes are swallowed by the snow almost instantly. A burst of light. Gone. Another. Gone. The darkness gives nothing back. The Chinese are not attacking from one side. They are attacking from all of them. This is not a probe. This is not a raid. 8 divisions, coordinated, timed, rehearsed, hitting simultaneously across a 40-mile front. The plan has been in place for weeks. The positions have been mapped. The timing is deliberate. At Udam-ni, on the western side of the reservoir, 2 Marine regiments, the 5th and 7th, are hit by multiple Chinese divisions. The perimeter is under assault from the ridgelines above and the valley floor below. There is no single point of attack to reinforce. The pressure is everywhere. The perimeter holds, barely, and it is shrinking. At Hagaruri, the situation is different and worse. Hagaruri is the critical hub, the airstrip, the supply depot, the point through which any breakout must pass. But the garrison there is thin. The fortifications are incomplete. When the Chinese hit the perimeter, they find gaps. They come through the gaps. For a period of hours, Chinese soldiers are inside the Hagaru-ri perimeter. Fighting is happening between buildings, in the dark, at close range. The men defending it are a mix of Marines, army troops, and support personnel, cooks, engineers, clerks, pressed into a defensive line that was never designed to hold against a divisional assault. They hold it. Not cleanly, not without cost, but they hold it. On the eastern shore of the reservoir, Task Force Faith, army units from the 7th Infantry Division, is in a different situation entirely. They are more isolated, more exposed. The forces hitting them are proportionally larger relative to their strength. The terrain offers less cover. The perimeter is longer than the number of men can adequately defend. By midnight, the eastern shore is in serious trouble. The men there are fighting in the same cold, with the same frozen weapons, with the same morphine that won't inject, and the same plasma that has turned solid in its bottles. But they have fewer men, less fortification, and no airstrip. What is happening on the eastern shore will get worse before it gets better. It will not get better for a long time. The cold is not passive. It is doing work tonight. A man who is hit and goes down in -40 degrees has minutes before the cold begins killing him independently of the wound. Medics working in the dark cannot feel what their hands are doing. Bandages applied with numb fingers may not be tight enough. A tourniquet applied by a man who cannot feel his hands may not be applied correctly. The morphine is frozen, solid. A medic trying to inject a man screaming from a wound is holding a syringe that will not function. Some medics are warming syringes inside their clothing, body heat against the barrel, trying to thaw enough to get one dose out. Plasma is frozen. Whole blood, if available, is freezing in transit. The medical system is not failing because of supply. It is failing because the temperature has made the supplies inert. Men are being treated with what works in the cold: pressure, warmth, movement. Keep them moving. Stop them from lying still. A man who lies still in -40 degrees is a man who does not wake up. The radios are intermittent. Some are working, some are not. The cold affects battery performance. Power drops, signal weakens. Transmissions cut out mid-sentence. Units trying to report their situation to higher command are getting through sometimes and not others. The result is that no one has a complete picture. Udamni doesn't know exactly what's happening at Hagaru-ri. Hagaru-ri doesn't know the full situation on the eastern shore. Koto-ri, further south, is receiving fragments, enough to know the attack is widespread, not enough to know the scale. Each position is fighting its own battle, in its own darkness, with its own incomplete information. There is no front line tonight. There are pockets, islands of men in the dark, fighting in every direction, connected to each other by radio transmissions that keep cutting out. The road south is blocked. Chinese forces have moved into the passes between Hagaru-ri and Koto-ri. The main supply route, the single road that connects every position to the coast, is cut in multiple places. Vehicles that try to move south are taking fire. The road north is irrelevant now. The road south is the only thing that matters. And it is not open. By midnight, the shape of the night is becoming clear. Every position is under assault. Every position is isolated. The road is cut. The passes are occupied. The temperature is dropping further. Some accounts from this night describe conditions approaching -50 degrees Celsius with wind chill. Men are fighting with weapons that jam every few rounds. They are clearing jams with hands they cannot feel, reloading with fingers that are losing dexterity, making decisions under fire in a darkness that shows them almost nothing. The Chinese keep coming, wave after wave. When one assault is repelled, another forms. The bugles start again. The whistles. The sound of men moving in the dark outside the perimeter wire. The ammunition is not unlimited. Somewhere in this night, in a foxhole on a ridgeline above Udamni, a Marine is doing the only thing available to him. He is staying awake. Because the men who fall asleep tonight, the ones who find a moment of stillness and close their eyes, some of them do not open them again. The cold does not announce itself. It does not feel like dying. It feels like warmth eventually, which is the last thing a man feels before he stops feeling anything. Staying awake is survival. Staying in the fight is survival. Moving is survival. Dawn is still hours away. The perimeters are smaller than they were at 21:30. The ammunition is lower. The casualties are being moved to central points. Men who cannot fight being laid in rows, in the cold, waiting for medical attention that the conditions make nearly impossible to provide. The Chinese are still attacking. The bugles have not stopped. And somewhere in the dark, on the road between Udam-ni and Hagaru-ri, there is a pass called Toktong Pass, and on the high ground above it, approximately 240 men from Fox Company have just realized that they are completely alone, that the Chinese are on three sides of them, and that if they lose that ground, the road south closes permanently. Scattered across a 40-mile front, cut off from each other, fighting with weapons that freeze between shots. How do these men survive until morning? And what does the man holding Toktong Pass understand about what happens if he doesn't? At some point on the night of November 27th, Fox Company understands the situation. Not from a briefing, not from a radio transmission that explains it clearly, from the silence on the flanks, from the direction the fire is coming from the absence of any friendly unit within reach. They are alone, 240 men on a ridgeline above Toktong Pass, 7 miles south of Udam-ni, 7 miles north of Hagaru-ri, equidistant between two positions that are themselves under assault and cannot send help. The Chinese are on the high ground to the north. The Chinese are on the slopes to the east and west. The road below, the road that connects Udam-ni to Hagaru-ri, the road that 8,000 men must use to move south, runs directly through the pass Fox Company is sitting above. No one is coming. Every unit in the area is fighting for its own survival. Fox Company has what it brought with it, what it can carry, and the ground it is standing on. The ridgeline is narrow. The perimeter Fox Company establishes is roughly 500 yards across at its widest point, a shallow oval of frozen ground on a spine of rock and ice above the pass. The slopes drop steeply on both sides. There is no room to maneuver, no room to fall back, no secondary position to retreat to. Retreat means going down the slope into Chinese-held ground. The foxholes are dug into frozen earth that resists every swing of a pick. Men chip at ground that is harder than packed gravel, making holes that are shallow because the ground will not yield. Night 1. The Chinese attack begins after midnight. Bugles first, then movement on the slopes, the sound of men climbing in the dark, equipment scraping against frozen rock. Then the first wave hits the perimeter. The fighting is close. Not distant rifle fire, close. Men throwing grenades down slopes at shapes moving upward. Automatic weapons firing at muzzle flashes, hand-to-hand at the perimeter wire where the Chinese break through and are pushed back. Flares go up. For a few seconds the slope is lit. White light on white snow, figures moving upward in the open. Then the flare dies and the darkness comes back harder than before. The bolt on a rifle in -40 degrees does not cycle cleanly after sustained fire. The heat of firing warms the metal briefly, then the cold reasserts itself. Men are working bolts between shots, keeping weapons moving, knowing that a weapon that stops moving in this temperature may not start again. Some men urinate on their bolts to thaw them. It works. It keeps the weapon functioning. The first attack is repelled. Night 2. The perimeter is slightly smaller. By necessity, the positions on the northern edge took the heaviest casualties on Night 1. The wounded are in the center of the perimeter. There is no aid station. There is a patch of ground slightly more sheltered than the rest, where the men who cannot fight are laid in sleeping bags. The cold works on them continuously. A man who is wounded and immobile in -40 degrees is fighting two battles simultaneously. The resupply drop comes during daylight, aircraft finding the position, dropping supplies by parachute. Some of it lands inside. Some of it scatters in the wind and lands in Chinese-held ground. Captain William Barber commands Fox Company. He is wounded on the first night, a gunshot wound that would justify evacuation. He does not evacuate. He moves around the perimeter on the ground when he cannot walk upright, directing the defense, repositioning men, making the decisions that keep the line intact. He stays. Night 3. The ammunition situation is becoming a calculation. Every man on the perimeter knows roughly how much he has. By night 3, men are being more deliberate, firing at confirmed targets, not at sounds. The cold has been working on the wounded for 48 hours. Shock, infection, frostbite, the cold accelerates all of it. The dead are stiff where they fell. In -40 degrees, a body freezes within hours. The men on the perimeter are fighting alongside men who are no longer alive. Night 4. Exhaustion is now a tactical factor. A man who has been awake for 72 hours, fighting every night in -40 degrees cold, with inadequate food, is not the same man who dug those foxholes. The Chinese are rotating fresh units into the assault. Fox Company is not rotating anyone. There are fewer of them. The perimeter has contracted again, but the pass below is still open. That is the only number that matters. Night 5. The resupply drop scatters badly. Wind catches the parachutes and pulls them across the slope. Most of what is dropped lands outside the perimeter. Men watch it go. They recover some of it, but not enough. Night 5 is the quietest of the 6. Whether this is a tactical decision or a rotation issue is not clear. The men holding the line are too exhausted to interpret the quiet as anything other than temporary. Night 6. At Hungnam, the 2 Marine regiments have been preparing to move. The plan is to fight south, through Chinese blocking positions, through Toktong Pass to Hagaru-ri, 14 miles, through terrain the Chinese control, with hundreds of casualties to carry. The plan depends on the pass being open. The pass is open because Fox Company is still on the ridge above it. On the morning of December 2nd, the relief column from Hungnam reaches Toktong Pass. Fox Company is still there. 240 men started on November 27th. Approximately 82 are able to walk out under their own power. The rest are wounded, frostbitten, or dead. The wounded are carried. The dead are brought out with the column. Fox Company does not leave its dead on that ridge. The pass is open. The column moves through. There is nothing mythological about what Fox Company did on that ridge. They were cold. They were afraid. They were running out of ammunition and watching their perimeter shrink. They held anyway. Not because they were certain they would survive, because the alternative, losing the pass, closing the road, trapping 8,000 men, was a consequence they understood and refused to accept. The column from Hungnam is moving south now. 14 miles to Hagaru-ri. Chinese blocking positions on the road. High ground still contested. Hundreds of casualties to move. The pass is open, but open is not the same as clear. 8,000 men must now fight their way down a road that the Chinese have had 6 days to prepare. The order comes down on December 1st. Move south, not withdraw, not retreat. The word used in the orders is attack. The column will fight its way south, clearing blocking positions, maintaining unit integrity, bringing its wounded and its dead. General Smith's phrasing is precise. Quote 0. It is not bravado. It is a tactical description. Every mile of road between Hungnam and Hagaru-ri has Chinese forces on the high ground. Moving south means clearing those positions. Clearing those positions means fighting uphill in -40 degrees cold, while simultaneously keeping the column moving below. The column forms on the morning of December 1st. It is not clean. At the front, infantry units tasked with clearing the road. Behind them, vehicles, trucks carrying the wounded, jeeps, artillery pieces. Behind the vehicles, more infantry. At the rear guard, units tasked with keeping the Chinese from collapsing the column from behind. The wounded are loaded onto every available surface. Men who cannot walk are placed on truck beds, on hoods, strapped to the outside of vehicles. The trucks are not warm. The men on them are exposed to wind that drops the effective temperature well below what the thermometer reads. A man who is wounded and immobile on the back of an open truck in -40-degree wind is in serious danger from the cold alone. There is no solution. The wounded go on what is available. The column begins to move. The first blocking position is less than a mile south of Hungnam. Chinese forces on the ridgeline are firing down into the column. The road runs through a narrow cut, high ground on both sides, no room to maneuver. Infantry units peel off and begin moving uphill. Uphill in -40 degrees cold, in snow, toward a position that is firing down at them. They are already exhausted. Their hands are unreliable. Their feet are frostbitten. They climb anyway. The position is cleared. The column moves forward. 1 mile. The aircraft help. Marine corsairs working the ridgelines, napalm on Chinese positions, strafing runs along the high ground. The pilots are flying in mountain conditions, at low altitude, in cold that affects aircraft performance. When the air support is on station, the pressure reduces. When the aircraft leave, for weather, darkness, or fuel, the pressure returns. The column moves faster when the planes are overhead. The vehicles are failing. Engines that have been sitting in -40 degrees cold do not start reliably. Fuel thickens. Hydraulic systems lose pressure. A truck that breaks down in a narrow cut stops the entire column. Men push vehicles by hand. Vehicles are towed. When the road is not wide enough to push them off, the column waits. Waiting on that road, under intermittent fire, is its own form of attrition. The rear guard is fighting continuously. Chinese forces are pressing from the north, looking for a moment when the rear guard thins. The units assigned to the rear are fighting a moving battle, breaking contact, moving south, establishing a new position. Breaking contact again. The rear guard cannot move faster than the column in front of it. By nightfall, the column has covered 7 miles. 7 miles in a full day of fighting. The column stops, not because the men want to, but because moving through Chinese-held mountains in complete darkness is a worse problem than moving in daylight. The men spend the night on the road, beside the vehicles. The temperature drops further. The wounded are the most vulnerable. Medics move through the column, checking men, keeping them conscious. Some men do not make it through the night, not from wounds, from cold. December 2nd, first light. The column moves again. Each blocking position requires the same sequence. Infantry off the road. Uphill. Clear the position. Back to the road. Column moves. Next position. The men doing the clearing are the same men who did it yesterday. There is no rotation. The air support is heavier on December 2nd. Corsairs work the ridgelines aggressively. Napalm burns through the snow. The blocking positions are cleared faster. The column reaches Toktong Pass in the afternoon. Fox Company is still there. 82 men able to walk. The rest wounded and carried. The two forces link up. No ceremony. The wounded are loaded onto vehicles. The dead are brought with the column. The pass is behind them. The column reaches Hagaruri on the afternoon of December 4th. It has taken 3 days to cover 14 miles. The men are 3 days colder, 3 days more exhausted, carrying 3 more days of casualties. But the force is intact. 8,000 men, their weapons, their artillery, their wounded, their dead, arrived at the consolidation point. Hagaruri is not the end. It is a pause. The coast is still 64 miles south. The road runs through Kotori and Funchilin Pass. And at Funchilin Pass, there is a problem that no amount of infantry can solve. The bridge is gone. A critical span over a concrete penstock, the only crossing on the only road, has been destroyed. The gap is too wide to bypass, too deep to cross without a bridge. Without a bridge, the vehicles cannot pass. Without the vehicles, the wounded cannot be moved. Without moving the wounded, the column does not reach the sea. They fought 14 miles to get here. They have 64 miles left, and the road south has a gap in it that no one has yet figured out how to cross. The column stops. Not from enemy fire, not from a blocking position on the ridgeline, from a gap in the road. Funchilin Pass. The road descends through a narrow gorge, steep walls on both sides, a concrete penstock house, a water control structure sitting directly across the route. The road runs over it, or it did. The span is gone. Where the bridge was, there is a 29-foot gap. Below the gap, a drop of several hundred feet into the gorge. The concrete edges are clean. The destruction was deliberate, precise. The Chinese knew this was the only crossing. They knew what removing it would do. The vehicles at the front of the column stop. The information moves back through the column, not as a formal report, but as the visible fact of a line of trucks and artillery pieces sitting motionless with nowhere to go. The gap is 29 feet wide. The column is 64 miles from the sea. Infantry can get around it. Men on foot can pick their way down the gorge walls, cross below, and climb back up. But the trucks carrying the wounded cannot descend a gorge wall. The artillery pieces cannot be manhandled down a cliff face. If the column abandons its vehicles here, The wounded stay on the mountain. Literally. The men who cannot walk have no path forward without the vehicles. The bridge is not a logistical inconvenience. It is the difference between reaching the sea intact and leaving the wounded behind on a frozen mountain. The solution had been identified days earlier. The 1st Marine Division's engineers assessed that prefabricated treadway bridge sections, each weighing over a ton, could span the gap if they could be delivered. The delivery method, a parachute airdrop. 8 sections, dropped from C-119 transport aircraft. On December 7th, the aircraft make the drop over Koto Ri. 8 bundles leave the aircraft. 1 lands outside the perimeter in Chinese-held ground. It is not recoverable. 7 sections are inside. The math no longer works. The gap requires a minimum of 8 sections to span it for heavy loads. The engineers look at the penstock house structure itself. They find it can serve as a center support. With the structure as a midpoint, 7 sections can span the gap in 2 shorter runs, rather than 1 long one. 7 sections is enough, but only because the engineers look at the problem differently when the original solution fails. The assembly begins. The Chinese know the column is stopped. Mortar rounds and sniper fire hit the area. The engineers are working in -40 degrees cold, handling metal that pulls heat from bare hands instantly. The sections are heavy. Moving them requires equipment in a space that offers no cover. The work takes hours. The bridge is ready on December 9th. The first truck approaches slowly. The driver moves until the front wheels are on the bridge, then stops. The sections flex. The sound of metal under load creaks in the cold air. The men watching do not move. The driver moves forward again. The truck crosses the penstock house. The rear wheels reach solid road on the far side. The bridge held, then the artillery pieces, each one a new test of whether 7 sections, assembled under fire in -40 degrees cold, will hold the weight of a howitzer. They hold. The column is not alone. Korean civilians, families from the villages around the reservoir, have been moving south with the column, somewhere around 105,000 people. They have children, they have the elderly. They cross the bridge too, on foot, in the gaps between vehicles. The engineers who built the bridge did not build it for them, but it holds their weight too. The crossing is deliberate. Each vehicle is monitored. The bridge sections are checked between heavy loads. By the time the last vehicles are across and the rear guard moves through, the bridge has held trucks, artillery, and tens of thousands of people. The engineers demolish it behind them. The gap is behind the column now. The sea is 29 miles away. The Chinese are still behind them. The rear guard is still in contact, still holding the pressure off. There are still blocking positions. There is still the cold. The column is moving. They crossed the gap. But the wounded are still on the trucks, and the coast is still a fighting march away. What does the final push to Hungnam cost? The column moves, south, down from the pass, away from the reservoir, away from the ridgelines, away from the ground that has been killing men for 2 weeks. The vehicles roll, the infantry walks beside them. The rear guard breaks contact, moves south, establishes a new position, breaks contact again. The rhythm is the same. Contact, clear, move, contact again. The Chinese are still there. They have been there since November 27th, pressing from behind, looking for the moment when the column's discipline breaks. The rear does not open up. The rear guard units are fighting a different war. The front is moving towards something. The rear guard is moving away from something, backward, maintaining contact with an enemy following them down the mountain. The men in the rear guard have not slept in any meaningful sense since the attack began. They are operating on reserves beyond physical capacity. The civilian column is still moving with them. Not in organized groups, but as 105,000 people following the only protection available. Families, elderly who should not be walking but are. Children carried by parents whose arms have been numb for days. Some soldiers share rations. Some share body heat. A child passed up to a truck cab for a few miles. The civilians slow the column, but the column does not leave them. By December 9th, the physical state of these men is dire. Frostbite has been working since the first night. Men have been walking on frostbitten feet for nearly 2 weeks. Fingers, toes, ears, noses, the cold takes what it can reach. Judgment degrades, reaction time slows. The discipline is maintained by habit, training, and the simple fact that stopping is not an option. Weapons are unreliable, but they keep moving. On December 10th, the terrain begins to change. The road is descending. The passes are behind them. The wind off the sea carries something the men can smell before they see it. Salt, water, the coast. The port of Hungnam comes into view. The harbor, the ships, the machinery of extraction. The navy is there, transport ships, landing craft. It is still not safe. The rearguard is still in contact, but the ships are there. The evacuation of Hungnam is one of the largest in history. Military personnel, equipment and artillery pieces dragged 78 miles are loaded, and the 105,000 civilians are loaded too. This is not a small decision. Loading them means leaving equipment behind. The decision is made. One ship, the SS Meredith Victory, takes on 14,000 civilians. A cargo vessel with a crew of 47, it makes the crossing anyway. The last units embark on December 24th. Engineers demolish the port facilities behind them, cranes, warehouses, fuel storage. The explosions are visible from the ships. On those ships, the 1st Marine Division counts itself. They came out as an intact division, but not with the same numbers. Marine and Army casualties run into the thousands. The men know who is not there. The Chinese 9th Army Group suffered catastrophic losses. Estimates cite between 40,000 and 80,000 Chinese casualties from battle and the cold. The army that held every tactical advantage lost more men than the army it surrounded. That is the central fact of Chosin. The ships move south. Men are sleeping for the first time in 2 weeks. They were surrounded on November 27th. They are on ships on December 24th. Between those dates, 6 nights on a frozen ridge, a fighting withdrawal, a bridge built from airdropped parts, and 105,000 civilians saved. They walked out, not all of them, but the force, the men, the weapons, the wounded, the dead, came off that mountain. On the ships, men sleep, not the half-sleep of a man in a foxhole listening for bugles. Real sleep, the kind that comes when the body finally accepts that the immediate threat is gone and takes what it has been owed for 2 weeks. Some men cannot sleep at all. They sit on deck or in the holds, and they are present in a way that has no clean description. The mountains are still visible from the deck as the ships move south. The reservoir is somewhere up there, behind the ridgelines, already becoming a place that existed rather than a place that is happening. The units count themselves, quietly, by roster, name by name, the men who answer and the men who don't. The 1st Marine Division came off the Chosin Reservoir as a division. That sentence requires context to mean anything. A division that has been surrounded and subjected to sustained assault by a force 8 times its size does not typically come off the battlefield as a division. Surrounded armies tend to fragment, then collapse, then surrender or die in place. The 1st Marine Division did none of those things. It fought 78 miles. It brought its wounded. It brought its dead. It brought its artillery. It arrived at Hungnam capable of being returned to combat, which it was within weeks. The Chinese 9th Army Group was destroyed, not weakened. Destroyed as a functional combat force. Estimates of Chinese casualties from combat and cold combined range between 40,000 and 80,000. The 9th Army Group did not conduct major operations again for months. It had to be rebuilt from the ground up. The army that held every advantage, numbers, terrain, surprise, preparation, lost more men than the army it surrounded. That is the central fact of what happened at Chosin. How did they escape? The answer is not simple, but it is not mysterious. Oliver Smith slowed the advance when every institutional pressure told him to move faster. He stockpiled supplies when the prevailing assumption was that they wouldn't be needed. He built the airstrip that evacuated the wounded and delivered the bridge sections that crossed the gap. He did these things because he understood that certainty in uncertain terrain is a form of negligence. MacArthur was certain. Smith was not. That difference between a commander who acts on what he knows and one who acts on what he doesn't know is visible in the outcome. Fox Company held a ridge for 6 nights with 240 men and walked off it with 82. Engineers assembled a bridge from air-dropped parts under fire in -40 degrees cold, with one section missing, and made the math work anyway. The rearguard broke contact and moved for 78 miles without the rear collapsing. None of these things were guaranteed. Each was a decision made by men who were cold and exhausted and afraid, not because they were certain it would work, but because the alternative was to stop, and stopping was not acceptable. The men who held the ridge did not hold it because they were destined to. They held it because they chose to, repeatedly, every night, when the choice was available to them. There is a version of this story that ends with a speech, with sacrifice honored in the language of monuments. That version has its place, but the men on those ships were thinking about who was not there. They were thinking about the men left on the ridgelines above Toktong Pass, the men on the eastern shore who didn't make it, and the names that didn't get answered when the roster was called. The meaning belongs to them, not to the institutions that sent them there, not to the commanders who were certain when they should have been cautious, to the men who were cold and surrounded and chose to keep moving. What happened at Chosin Reservoir in the winter of 1950 should not have ended the way it ended. The numbers, the terrain, the temperature, none of it supported an intact fighting withdrawal. It should have been a catastrophe. And yet, they were surrounded. They were outnumbered 8-1. They were on one road in -40 degrees cold with the passes blocked and the bridge destroyed. And they walked out.